Hello, guys. Welcome to Psyched Minds. If you have not subscribed yet to the channel, do subscribe, like, and share. We are currently reading We the Living by Anne Rand, Part 2, Chapter 3. In the afternoon, 3 days later, the doorbell rang and Kira went to answer it. She threw the door half open, protected by a chain. On the stair landing stood a heavy woman in a smart, expensive overcoat. Her face, slanting back from a prominent pointed chin, was raised with a studied movement of graceful inquiry, revealing a stout, white neck. Her full lips, smeared with a violent magenta, were half open, revealing strong white teeth. Her hand poised on a broad expanse of green silk scarf, she drawled in a self consciously gracious voice, "Does Leo Kovalensky live here?" Kira looked incredulously at the diamond ring sparkling on the short, white fingers. She answered, "Why, yes." She did not remove the chain. She stood staring at the woman. The woman said with a little accent of gentle firmness, "I want to see him." Kira let her enter. The woman looked at Kira curiously, inquisitively, narrowing her eyes. Leo rose with a surprised frown when they entered the room. The woman extended both hands to him in a dramatic greeting. "Leo, so delightful to see you again. I remembered my threat to find you. I really intend to be a nuisance." Leo did not smile in answer to her expectant giggle. He bowed graciously. He said, "Kira, this is Antonia Pavlovna Platoshkina. Kira Alexandrovna Argonova." "Oh, Argonova? Oh," said Antonia Pavlovna, as if noting the fact that Kira's name was not Leo's. She sounded almost relieved. She extended her arm in a straight line, her fingers drooping, as if she were giving her hand to a man and expecting him to kiss it. "Antonia Pavlovna and I were neighbors in the sanatorium," Leo explained, "and he was a perfectly ungracious neighbor, I must complain." Antonia Pavlovna laughed huskily. "He wouldn't wait for me, and I wanted so much to leave on the same train. And Leo, you didn't give me your apartment number, and I had a perfectly terrible time trying to get it out of the Aprovdom. Aprovdoms are one of the unavoidable nuisances of our era, and all we of the intelligentsia can do is bear with it with a sense of humor." She took off her coat. She wore a plain black dress of new expensive silk in the latest fashion and foreign earrings of green celluloid circles. Her hair was combed back severely off her forehead, and two trim, sleek coils were flattened against her cheeks, smeared with a very white powder. Her hair was an incredible orange, the color of a magnificent string of amber that swung like a pendulum, striking her stomach when she moved. Her dress fitted tightly, slanting sharply from very wide hips down to heavy legs with very thin ankles and very small feet that seemed crushed under their disproportionate burden. She sat down and her stomach settled in a wide fold over her lap. "When did you return, Tonia?" Leo asked. "Yesterday, and oh, what a trip!" She sighed. "These Soviet trains? Really, I believe I lost everything I accomplished in the sanatorium. I was taking a rest cure for my nerves," she explained, pointing her chin at Kira. "And what sensitive person isn't a nervous wreck these days? But the Crimea? That place saved my life." "It was beautiful," Leo agreed. "But really, it lost all its charms after you left, Leo. You know, he was the most charming patient in that dull sanatorium, and everybody admired him so much. Oh, purely platonically, my dear, if you're worried." She winked at Kira. "I'm not," said Kira. "Leo was so kind as to help me with my French lessons. I was learning, that is, brushing up on my French. It is such a relief in these drab days to stumble upon a person like Leo. You must forgive me, Leo. I realize that I may be an unwelcome guest, but it would be too much to expect of a woman if you ask her to give up a beautiful friendship in this revolting city where real people are so rare." "Why no, Tonia? I'm glad you took the trouble to find me." "Ah, these people here. I know so many of them. We meet, we talk, we shake hands. What does it mean? Nothing. Nothing but an empty physical gesture. Who among them knows the deeper significance of the spirit or the real meaning of our lives?" Leo's slow, faint smile was not one of understanding, but he said, One could forget one's trouble in some engrossing activity if it were permitted these days. How profoundly true. Of course, the modern woman of culture is organically incapable of remaining inactive. I have a tremendous program outlined for myself for this coming winter. I am going to study. I prosper. I propose to master ancient Egypt. What? Asked Kira. Ancient Egypt? Said Antonia Pavlovna. I want to recapture its spirit in all its entirety. There is a profound significance in these faraway cultures, a mysterious bond with the present, which we moderns do not appreciate fully. I am certain that in the former incarnation you are not interested in theosophy, are you, Leo? No. I can appreciate your viewpoint, of course. But I have given it a thorough study and a great deal of thought. There is a transcendental truth in it, an explanation for so many of the baffling phenomena of our existence. Of course, I have one of those natures that long for the mystical. However, you must not think me old fashioned. You must not be surprised if I tell you that I am studying political economy. You are, Tonia. Why? You are, Tonia. Why? One cannot be out of tune with one's time, you know. To criticize, we must understand. I find it surprisingly thrilling. There is a certain peculiar romance in labor and markets and machines. Apropos, have you read the latest volume of verse by Valentina Serkina? No, I haven't. Thoroughly delightful. Such depth of emotion and yet completely modern. So essentially modern. There is a very verse about, how does it go? About my heart is asbestos that remains cool over the blast furnace of my emotions, or something like that. It is really superb. I must admit, I don't read modern poets. I'll bring you that book, Leo. I know you will understand and appreciate it, and I'm sure Kira Alexandrovna will enjoy it. Thank you, but I never read poetry, said Kira. Indeed? How peculiar. I'm sure you care for music. Foxtrots, said Kira. Really? Antonia Pavlovna smiled condescendingly. When she smiled, her chin pointed further forward and her forehead slanted back. Her lips opened slowly, uncomfortably, as if slithering apart. Speaking of music, she turned to Leo. It is another essential item on my winter's program. I've made Coco promise me a box for every concert at the State Philharmony. Poor Coco, he's really very artistic at heart if one knows how to approach him, but I'm afraid that his unfortunate early upbringing has not trained him for an appreciation of symphonic music. I shall probably have to be alone in my box. Oh, here's a happy thought. You may share it with me, Leo, and Kira Alexandrovna, of course. She nodded to Kira and turned to Leo again. Thank you, Tonia, he answered, but I'm afraid we won't have much time for that this winter. Leo, my dear. She spread her arms in a wide gesture of sympathy. Don't you think I understand? Your financial position is. There are not many times for men like you. However, do not lose courage. With my connections, Coco cannot refuse me anything. He hated to see me leave for the Crimea. He missed me so much you wouldn't believe how glad he was to see me back. He could not be more devoted if he were my husband. In fact, he couldn't be as devoted as he is. Marriage is an outmoded prejudice, as you know. She smiled at Kira. I'm sure the Crimea has helped your health, Leo said hastily, coldly. There's no other place like it. It is a bit of paradise. The dark velvet sky, the diamond stars, the sea, and the divine moonlight. You know, I've wondered why you remained so indifferent to its magic spell. I thought you were essentially unromantic. Of course, I can understand the reason now. She threw a swift glance at Kira. The glance froze as if seized and held by Kira's fixed eyes. Then Antonia Pavlovna's lips slithered into a cold smile and she turned away sighing. You men are strange creatures. To understand you is a whole science in itself and the first duty of every real woman. I've mastered it thoroughly in the bitter classroom of experience. She sighed wearily with a deprecatory shrug. I have known heroic officers of the White Army. I have known brutal iron commissars. She laughed shrilly. I confess it openly. Why not? We are all moderns here. I have known many people who misunderstood me, but I do not mind. I can forgive them. You know, Noblesse oblige? Kira sat on the arm of the chair, watching the toes of her old slippers, studying her fingernails while they talked. It was dark beyond the window when Antonia Pavlovna glanced at a diamond studded wristwatch. Oh, how late it is! It's been so delightful that I haven't noticed the time at all. I must hurry home. Coco is probably getting melancholy without me, the poor child. She opened her bag, took out a little mirror, and holding it delicately in two straight fingers, inspected her face carefully through narrowed eyes. She took out a little scarlet bottle with a tiny brush and smeared a purplish blot over her lips. Delightful stuff, she explained, showing the bottle to Kira. Infinitely better than lipstick. I notice you don't use much lipstick, Kira Alexandrovna. I would recommend it strongly. As woman to woman, one should never neglect one's appearance, Particularly, she laughed a friendly, intimate laughter, particularly when one has such valuable property to guard. At the door in the lobby, Antonia Pavlovna turned to Leo. Don't worry about this coming winter, Leo. With my connections, Coco, of course, knows the highest. Why, I would be afraid to whisper some of the names he knows, and of course, Coco is putty in my hands. You must meet him, Leo. We can do a lot for you. I shall see to it that a magnificent young man like you is not lost in this Soviet swamp. Thank you, Tonia. I appreciate your offer, but I hope that I am not quite lost yet. Just what is his position? Kira asked suddenly. Coco? He's assistant manager of the food trust, officially. Antonia Pavlovna winked mysteriously with a brief chuckle, lowering her voice. Then, waving a hand with a diamond that flashed a swift spark in the lights of an electric bulb, she drawled, Au revoir, Miss. I shall see you soon. Slamming the chain over the door, Kira gasped, Leo, I am surprised. By what? That you can be acquainted with such an unspeakable. I do not presume to criticize your friends. They were passing through Marisha's room. In a corner by the window, Marisha raised her head from her book and looked at Leo curiously, startled by the tone of his voice. They crossed the room and Leo slammed the door behind them. You could have been civil, at least, he stated. What do you mean? You could have said a couple of words every other hour. She didn't come to hear me talk. I didn't invite her, and she is not a friend of mine. You didn't have to be so tragic about it. But, Leo, where did you pick that up? That was in the same sanatorium that it happened to have foreign books, which is a rare treat when you have to spend your days reading Soviet trash. That's how we got acquainted. What's wrong with that? But, Leo, don't you see what she's after? Of course I do. Are you really afraid she'll get it? Leo? Well then, why can't I speak to her? She's a harmless fool who's trying to amount to something, and she really does have connections. But to associate with that type of person, she's no worse than the red trash one has to associate with these days, and at least she's not red. Well, as you wish. Oh, forget it, Kira. She'll never come again. He was smiling at her suddenly, warmly, his eyes bright as if nothing had happened, and she surrendered, her hands on his shoulders, whispering, Leo, don't you see? Nothing of that type should even dare to look at you. He laughed, patting her cheek. Let her look. It won't hurt me. Leo had said, Write to your uncle in Budapest at once. Thank him and tell him not to send us money any longer. I'm well. We'll struggle on our own. I have written down the exact sum of everything you sent me. Have you kept track of what you spent here, as I asked? We'll have to start repaying him. If he is patient, for the devil alone knows how long it will take, she had whispered. Yes, Leo. Without looking at him. He had noticed her gold wristwatch and frowned. Where did that come from? She had said, It's a present. From Andrei Taganov? Oh, really? So you're accepting presents from him? Leo. She had whirled upon him defiantly. Then she had pleaded, Why not, Leo? It was my birthday and I couldn't hurt his feelings. He had shrugged contemptuously. Oh, I don't mind. It's your own business. Personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable wearing something paid for with GPU money. She had hidden the cigarette lighter and the silk stockings and the perfume. She had told Leo that the red dress had been made for his return. He wondered why she did not like to wear it. She spent most of her days in the halls of the Winter Palace, saying to the gaping excursionists, and it is the duty of every conscientious citizen to be acquainted with the history of our revolutionary movement in order to become a trained, enlightened fighter in the ranks of the world revolution, our highest goal. In the evenings, she tried to tell Leo, I have to go out tonight, I've promised Irina, or I really must go out tonight at some meeting of excursion workers, but he made her stay at home. She looked into the mirror sometimes and wondered about the eyes people had told her were so clear, so honest. She did not go out at night. She could not tear herself away. She could not satisfy the hunger of looking at him or of sitting silently, huddled in an armchair, watching him move across the room. She would watch the lines of his body as he stood at the window, turned away from her. His hands spread on his waistline, holding his back, his body leaning lightly backward against his hand, one tense, sunburned muscle of his neck showing under dark, disheveled hair. Thrilling as a suggestion, a promise of his face which she could not see. Then she would rise and walk hesitantly towards him and let her hand run slowly down the hard tension of his neck without a word, without a kiss. Then she could think with a cold wonder of another man who was waiting for her somewhere. But she knew that she had to see Andre. One evening she put on the red dress and told Leo that she had promised to call on her family. May I go with you? He asked. I haven't seen them since my return and I owe them a visit. No, not this time, Leo, she answered calmly. I would rather you wouldn't. Mother is... She's so changed. I know you won't get along with her. Do you have to go tonight, Kira? I hate to let you go and to stay here alone. I've been without you for such a long time. I promised them I would come tonight. I won't stay late. I'll be back soon. She was putting on her coat when the doorbell rang. It was Marisha who went to open the door and they heard Galina Petrovna's voice sweeping through the room, approaching. Well, I'm glad they are home. Well, if I thought they were visiting others and neglecting their old parents, and Galina Petrovna entered first. Lydia followed. Alexander Dmitrievich shuffled in behind them. Leo, my dear child! Galina Petrovna swept towards him and kissed him on both cheeks. I'm so glad to see you. Welcome back to Leningrad. Lydia shook hands limply. She removed her old hat, sat down heavily as if collapsing, and fumbled with her hairpins. A long strand of hair was falling loosely out of the careless roll at the back of her neck. She was very pale and used no powder. Her nose was shiny. She stared mournfully at the floor. Alexander Dmitrievich muttered, I'm glad you are well, my boy, and patted Leo's shoulder uncertainly, with the timid, frightened look of an animal expecting to be hurt. Kira faced him calmly and said with cold assurance, Why did you come? I was just starting for your house as I promised. As you... Galina Petrovna began, but Kira interrupted. Well, since you are here, take your coats off. I'm so happy you are well again, Leo, said Galina Petrovna. I feel as if you were my son. You really are my son. Everything else is just bourgeois prejudices. Mother, Lydia remonstrated, feebly, hopelessly. Galina Petrovna settled down in a comfortable armchair. Alexander Dmitrievich sat apologetically on the edge of a chair by the door. Thank you for coming, Leo smiled graciously. My only excuse for neglecting to call as I should have is... Kira, Galina Petrovna finished for him. Do you know that we haven't seen her more than 3 times while you were away? I have a letter for you, Kira, Lydia said suddenly. A letter? Kira's voice jerked slightly. Yes, it came today. There was no return address on the envelope, but Kira knew the handwriting. She threw the letter indifferently down on the table. Don't you want to open it? Leo asked. No hurry, she said evenly. Nothing important. Well, Leo? Galina Petrovna's voice boomed. Her voice had become louder, clearer. What are your plans for the winter? This is such an interesting year we are entering. So many opportunities, particularly for the young. So many? What? Leo asked. Such a wild field of activity. It's not like in the dying, decadent cities of Europe where people slave all their lives for measly wages and a pitiful little existence. Here, each one of us has an opportunity to be a useful, creative member of the stupendous whole. Here, one's work is not merely a wasted effort to satisfy one's petty hunger, but a contribution to the gigantic building of humanity's future. Mother, Kira asked, who wrote all that down for you? Really, Kira? Galina Petrovna drew up her shoulders. You are not only impertinent to your mother, but I think you are also a bad influence on Leo's future. I wouldn't worry about that, Galina Petrovna, said Leo. And of course, Leo, I hope that you are modern enough to outlive the prejudices we have all shared. We must admit that the Soviet government is the only progressive government in the world. It utilizes all its human resources. Even an old person like me, who has been useless all her life, can find an opportunity for creative toil. And as for young people like you, where are you working, Galina Petrovna? Leo asked. Oh, don't you know? I'm teaching in a labor school. They used to be called high schools, sewing and fancy needlework. We all realize that a practical subject like sewing is much more important to our little future citizens than the dead, useless things such as Latin, which were taught in the old Burgoy's days. And our methods, we are centuries ahead of Europe. For instance, take the complex method that we are. Mother, Lydia said wearily, Leo may not be interested. Nonsense! Leo is a modern young man. Now, this method we are using at present, for instance, what did they do in the old days? The children had to memorize mechanically so many dry, disjointed subjects history, physics, arithmetics, with no connection between them at all. What do we do now? We have the complex method. Take last week, for instance, one subject was factory, so every teacher had to build his course around that central subject. In the history class, they taught the growth and development of factories. In the physics class, they taught all about machinery. The arithmetic teacher gave them problems about production and consumption. In the art class, they drew factory interiors. And in my class, we made overalls and blouses. Don't you see the advantage of the method? The indelible impression it will leave in children's mind? Overalls and blouses, practical, concrete, instead of teaching them a lot of dry, theoretical seams and stitches. Lydia's head drooped listlessly. She had heard it all many times. I'm glad you are enjoying your work, Galina Petrovna, said Leo. I'm glad you get your rations, said Kira. I do indeed, Galina Petrovna stated proudly. Of course, our distribution of commodities has not as yet reached a level of perfection, and really the sunflower seed oil I got last week was so rancid I couldn't use it. But then this is a transitional period of state construction. Alexander Dmitrievich yelled suddenly, hastily, as a well memorized lesson. And what are you doing, Alexander Dmitrievich? Leo asked. Oh, I'm working. Alexander Dmitrievich jerked as if ready to jump forward, as if defending himself hastily against a dangerous accusation. Yes, I'm working. I'm a Soviet employee. I am. Of course, Galina Petrovna drawled. Alexander's position is not as responsible as mine. He's a bookkeeper in a district office somewhere way off on the Vasilevsky Island. Such a long trip every day. And just what kind of an office is it, Alexander? But anyway, he does have a bread card, though he doesn't get enough, even for himself alone. But I'm working, Alexander Dmitrievich said meekly. Of course, said Galina Petrovna. I get better ration cards because I'm in a perfect class of pedagogists. I'm very active socially. Why do you know, Leo, that I have been elected Assistant Secretary of the Teachers' Council? It is gratifying to know that the present regime appreciates qualities of leadership. I even gave a speech on the methodology of modern education at an inter-club meeting where Lydia played the Internationale so beautifully. Sure, Lydia said mournfully. The Internationale. I'm working too, musical director and accompanist in a workers' club. A pound of bread a week and carfare and sometimes money, what's left after the contributions each month. Lydia is not pliable, sighed Galina Petrovna. But I play the Internationale, said Lydia, and the Red Funeral March. You fell as a victim, and the club songs. I even got applauded when I played the Internationale at the meeting where Mother made the speech. Kira rose wearily to make tea. She pumped the primers and put the kettle on and watched it thoughtfully. And through the hissing of the flame, Galina Petrovna's voice boomed loudly, rhythmically, as if addressing a class. Yes, twice, imagine. two honorable mentions in our students' wall newspaper as one of the three most modern and conscientious pedagogists. Yes, I do have some influence. When that insolent young teacher tried to run the school, she was dismissed fast enough, and you can be sure I had something to say about that. Kira did not hear the rest. She was watching the letter on the table, wondering when she had heard a voice again. It was Lydia's, and it was saying shrilly, "Spiritual consolation. I know. It had been revealed to me. There are secrets beyond our mortal minds. Holy Russia's salvation will come from faith. It has been predicted. Through patience and long suffering shall we redeem our sins." Behind the door, Marisha wound her gramophone and played John Gray. It was a new record, and the swift little notes jerked gaily, clicking in sharp, short knocks. John Gray was brave and darling. Kitty was very pretty. Kira sat, her chin in her hands, and the glow of the primus flame flickering under her nostrils, and she smiled suddenly, very softly, and said, "I like that song. That awful vulgar thing so overplayed that I'm sick of it." Lydia gasped. "Yes, even if it is overplayed, it has such a nice rhythm, clicking like rivets driven into steel." She was speaking softly, simply, a little helplessly, as she seldom spoke to her family. She raised her head and looked at them, and they had never seen it before. Her eyes were pleading and hurt. "Still thinking of your engineering, aren't you?" asked Lydia. "Sometimes," Kira whispered. "I can't understand what's wrong with you, Kira." Galina Petrovna boomed. You are never satisfied. You have a perfectly good job, easy and well paid, and you mope over some childish idea of yours. Excursion guides, like pedagogists, are considered no less important than engineers these days. It is quite an honorary and responsible position and contributes a great deal to social construction. And isn't it more fascinating to build with living minds and ideologies rather than with bricks and steels? "It's your own fault, Kira," said Lydia. "You will always be unhappy since you refuse the consolation of faith." "What's the use, Kira?" sighed Alexander Dmitrovich. "Who said anything about being unhappy?" Kira asked loudly, sharply, jerking her shoulders. She got up, took a cigarette, and lighted it, bending from the primus flame. "Kira has always been unmanageable," said Galina Petrovna, "but one would think that these are times to make one come down to earth." "What are your plans for the winter, Leo?" Alexander Dmitrovich asked, suddenly, indifferently, as if he expected no answer. "None," said Leo. "Not for any winter to come." "I had a dream," said Lydia, "about a crow and a hare. The hare crossed the road, and that's an unlucky omen. But the crow sat on a tree that looked like a huge white chalice." "You take my nephew Victor, for instance," said Galina Petrovna. "There's a smart, modern young man. He's graduating from the institute this fall, and he has an excellent job already, supporting his whole family. Now, there's nothing sentimental about him. He has his eyes open to modern reality. He will go far, that boy." "But Vasily isn't working," Alexander Dmitrovich remarked with a dull, quiet wonder. "Vasily has never been practical," stated Galina Petrovna. Alexander Dmitrovich said suddenly, irrelevantly, "It's a pretty red dress you have, Kira." She smiled wearily. "Thank you, father." "You don't look so well, child. Tired?" "No, not particularly. I'm fine." Then Galina Petrovna's voice drowned out the roar of the primus, and it's only the best teachers who are praised in the wall newspapers. Our students are very severe, and late at night, when the guests had gone, Kira took the letter into the bathroom and opened it. It contained 2 lines. "Kira, dearest, please forgive me for writing, but won't you telephone me? Andre." She led 2 excursions on the following day. For coming home, she told Leo that she would be dismissed if she did not attend a guides meeting that evening. She put on her red dress. On the stair landing, she kissed Leo lightly as he stood watching her go. She waved to him, vaulting down the stairs with a cold, gay chuckle. On a sweet corner, she opened her purse, took out the little French bottle, and pressed a few drops of perfume into her hair. She leaped into a tramway at full speed and stood hanging onto a leather strap, watching the lights swarm past. When she got off, she walked lightly, swiftly, with a cold, precise determination towards the palace that was a party club. She ran soundlessly up the crumbling marble stairway of the pavilion. She knocked sharply at the door. When Andre opened the door, she laughed, kissing him. I know, I know, I know. Don't say it. I want to be forgiven first and then I'll explain. He whispered happily. You are forgiven. You don't have to explain. She did not explain. She did not let him utter a complaint. She whirled around the room and he tried to catch her, and the cloth of her coat fell cold in his hands, cold and fragrant of summer night air. He could whisper only, do you know that it's been 2 weeks since? But he did not finish the sentence. Then she noticed that he was dressed for the street. Were you going out, Andre? Oh, yes, I was, but it's not important. Where were you going? Just to a party cell meeting? A party cell meeting? And you say it's not important, but you can't miss that? Yes, I can. I'm not going. Andre, I would rather come tomorrow and let you. No. Well then, let's go out together. Take me to the European roof. Tonight? Yes. Now. He did not want to refuse. She did not want to notice the look in his eyes. They sat at a wide table in the roof garden on top of the European hotel. They sat in a dim corner and they could see nothing of the long room but the naked white back of a woman a few tables away, with a little strand of golden hair curling at the nape of her neck, escaping from the trim, lustrous waves of her coiffure, with a little golden shadow between her shoulder blades, her long fingers holding a glass with a liquid the color of her hair, swaying slowly, and beyond the woman, beyond a haze of yellow lights and blush, rippling smoke, an orchestra played foxtrots from Bajadir, and the violinist swayed to the rhythm of the golden glass. Andre said, it's been 2 weeks, Kira, and you probably need it. He slipped a roll of bills into her hand. This month's salary. His month's salary. She whispered, pushing it back, closing his fingers over the bill. No, Andre. Thank you, but I don't need it, and I don't think I'll need it again. But you see, I got so many excursions to lead, and mother got more classes at the school, and we all have clothes and everything we need, so that. But Kira, I want you to. Please, Andre, don't let's argue. Not about that. Please, keep it. If I need it, I'll tell you. Promise? Yes. The violins rumbled dully, heavily, and suddenly the music burst out like a firecracker, so that the swift, laughing notes could almost be seen as sparks shooting to the ceiling. You know, said Kira, I shouldn't ask you to bring me here. It's not a place for you. But I like it. It's only a caricature and a very poor little one at that, but still it's a caricature of what Europe is. Do you know that music they are playing? It's from Bajader. I saw it. They're playing it in Europe too, like here. Almost like here. Kira, Andre asked. That Leo Kovalensky, is he in love with you or something? She looked at him, and the reflection of an electric light stood still as two sparks in her eyes and as a bright smile oval on her patent leather collar. Why do you ask that? I saw your cousin, Victor Dunaev, at a club meeting, and he told me that Leo Kovalensky was back, and he smiled as if the news should mean something to me. I didn't even know that Kovalensky had been away. Yes, he's back. He's been away somewhere in the Crimea for his health, I think. I don't know whether he's in love with me, but Victor was in love with me once, and he's never forgiven me for that. I see. I don't like that man. Victor? Yes, and Leo Kovalensky's too. I hope you don't see him often. I don't trust that type of man. Oh, I see him occasionally. The orchestra had stopped playing. Andre, ask them to play something for me. Something I like. It's called the Song of Broken Glass. He watched her as the music burst out again, splattering sparks of sounds. It was the gayest music he had ever heard, and he had never seen her look sad. But she sat motionless, staring helplessly, her eyes forlorn, bewildered. It's very beautiful, this music, Kira, he whispered. Why do you look like that? It's something I liked long ago when I was a child. Andre, did you ever feel as if something had been promised to you in your childhood and you look at yourself and you think, I didn't know then that this is what would happen to me? And it's strange and funny and a little sad. No, I was never promised anything. There were so many things that I didn't know then, and it's so strange to be learning them now. You know, the first time I brought you here, I was ashamed to enter. I thought it was no place for a party man. I thought he laughed softly, apologetically. I thought I was making a sacrifice for you, and now I like it. Why? Because I like to sit in a place where I have no reason to be, no reason but to sit and look at you across the table. Because I like those lights on your collar. Because you have a very stern mouth, and I like that. But when you listen to that music, your mouth is gay, as if it were listening too. And all those things, they have no meaning for anyone on earth but me. And when I've lived a life where every hour have to have a purpose, and suddenly I discover what it's like to feel things that have no purpose but myself, and I see suddenly how sacred a purpose that can be, so that I can't even argue, I can't doubt, I can't fight it. And I know then that a life is possible whose only justification is my own joy. Then everything else suddenly seems very different to me. She whispered, Andre, you shouldn't talk like that. I feel as if I were taking you away from your own life, from everything that has been your life. Don't you want to feel it? But doesn't it frighten you? Don't you think sometimes that it may bring you to a choice you have no right to make? He answered with so soft a conviction that the words sounded light, unconcerned, with a calm beyond earnestness. No. He leaned towards her across the table, his eyes serene, his voice soft and steady. Kira, you look frightened, and really, it's not a serious question. I have never had many questions to face in my life. People create their own questions because they are afraid to look straight. All you have to do is look straight and see the road. And when you see it, don't sit looking at it. Walk. I joined the party because I knew I was right. I love you because I know I'm right. In a way, you and my work are the same. Things are really very simple. Not always, Andre. You know your road. I don't belong in it. That's not in the spirit of what you taught me. She whispered helplessly. What did I teach you? The orchestra was playing the Song of Broken Glass. No one sang it. Andre's voice sounded like the words of that music. He was saying, You remember you said once that we had the same root somewhere in both of us because we both believed in life. It's a rare capacity and it can't be taught. And it can't be explained to those in whom that word, life, doesn't awaken the kind of feeling that a temple does, or a military march, or a statue of a perfect body. It is for that feeling that I joined a party which at the time could lead me only to Siberia. It is for that feeling that I wanted to fight against the most senseless and useless of monsters standing in the way of human life. And that is something we call now humanity's politics. And so, my own existence was only the fight and the future. You taught me the present. She made a desperate attempt, she said slowly, watching him. Andre, when you told me you loved me for the first time, you were hungry. I wanted to satisfy that hunger. And that's all? That's all. He laughed quietly, so quietly that she had to give up. You don't know what you are saying, Kira. Women like you don't love only like that. What are women like me? What temples are, and military marches, and let's have a drink, Andre. You want a drink? Yes, now. All right. He ordered the drinks. He watched the glow of the glass at her lips, a long, thin, shivering line of liquid light between fingers that looked golden in its reflection. He said, Let's drink a toast to something I could never offer, but in a place like this, to my life. Your new life. My only one. Andre, what if you lose it? I can't lose it. But so many things can happen. I don't want to hold your life in my hands. But you are holding it. Andre, you must think once in a while that it's possible that what if anything should happen to me? Why think about it? But it's possible. She felt suddenly as if the words of his answer were the links of a chain she would never be able to break. It's also possible for every one of us to have to face a death sentence someday. Does it mean that we have to prepare for it? That brings us to the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of part 2. They left the roof garden early and Kira asked Andre to take her home. She was tired, she did not look at him. He said, "Certainly, dearest," and called a cab and let her sit silently, her head on his shoulder, while he held her hand and kept silent not to disturb her. He left her at her parents' house. She waited on a dark stair landing and heard his cab driving away. She waited longer. For 10 minutes she stood in the darkness, leaning against a cold glass pane. Beyond the pane there was a narrow air shaft and a bare brick wall with one window. In the window a yellow candle shivered convulsively, and the huge shadow of a woman's arm kept rising and falling senselessly, monotonously. After 10 minutes, Kira walked downstairs and hurried to a tramway. Passing through Marisha's room, she heard a stranger's voice behind the door of her own room, a slow, deep, drawling voice that paused carefully, meticulously on every letter O, and then rolled on as if on buttered hinges. She threw the door open. The first person she saw was Antonia Pavlovna in a green brocaded turban, pointing her chin forward inquisitively. Then she saw Leo, then she saw the man with the drawling voice, and her eyes froze. While he lumbered up, throwing at her a swift glance of appraisal and suspicion. "Well, Kira, I thought you were spending the night with the excursion guides, and you said you would be back early." Leo greeted her sharply, while Antonia Pavlovna drawled, "Good evening, Kira Alexandrovna." "I'm sorry I got away as soon as I could," Kira answered, her eyes staring at the stranger's face. "Kira, may I present? Karpovich Morozov, Kira Alexandrovna Argonova." She did not notice that Karpovich's big fist was shaking her hand. She was looking at his face. His face had large blonde freckles, light narrow eyes, a heavy red mouth, and a short nose with wide vertical nostrils. She had seen it twice before. She remembered the speculator of the Nikolaevsky station, the food trader of the market. She stood without removing her coat, without saying a word, cold with a feeling of sudden, inexplicable panic. "What's the matter, Kira?" Leo asked. "Leo, haven't we met Citizen Morozov before?" "I don't believe so." "Never had the pleasure, Kira Alexandrovna," Morozov drawled, his eyes at once shrewd and naive and complacently friendly. While Kira was removing her coat slowly, he turned to Leo. "And the store, Lev Sergeyevich, we'll have it in the neighborhood of the Kuznetsky market. Best neighborhood. I have my eyes on a vacant store. Just what we need. One window, narrow room, not many square meters to pay for, and I slipped a couple of tens to the Apravdom, and he let us have a good big basement thrown in. Just what we need. I can take you there tomorrow. You'll be most pleased." Kira's coat dropped to the floor. A lamp stood on the table in its glow. She could see Morozov's face leaning towards Leo's, his slow words muffled on his heavy lips to a sly, guilty whisper. She stared at Leo. He was not looking at her. His eyes were cold, widened slightly by a strange eagerness. She stood in the semi-darkness beyond the circle of lamplight. The men paid no attention to her. Antonia Pavlovna threw a slow, expressionless glance at her and turned to the table, flicking ashes off her cigarette. "How's the Apravdom?" Leo asked. "Couldn't be better," Morozov chuckled. "A friendly fellow, easy-going and practical. A few 10 rubles bill and some vodka once in a while. With careful handling, he won't cost us much. I told him to have the store cleaned for you, and we'll order new signs. Lev Kovalensky, food products." What are you talking about? Kira threw the words at Morozov with the violence of a slap in the face. She stood over him, the lamplight scattering broken shadows across her face. Morozov leaned away from her, closer to the table, startled. It's a little business deal we are discussing, Kira Alexandrovna, he explained in a soft, conciliating drawl. I promised you that Coco would do a great deal for Leo. Antonia Pavlovna smiled. Kira, I'll explain later, Leo said slowly. The words were a command. Silently, she pulled a chair to the table and sat facing Morozov. Leaning forward on her crossed elbow, Morozov continued, trying not to look at her fixed eyes that seemed to register his every word. You understand the advantage of the arrangement. Lev Sergeyevich, a private trader is not easy title to bear these days. Consider the rent on your living quarters, for instance, that alone could swallow all the profits. Now, if we say you are the sole owner, well, the rent won't be so much since you have just this one room here to pay for. Now, me, for instance, we have three large rooms, Tonia and me, and if they brand me a private trader, good Lord Almighty, the rent on that will wreck the whole business. That's all right, said Leo. I'll carry it. I don't mind if I'm called private trader or Nicholas too or Mephistopheles. That's it. Morozov chuckled too loudly, his chin and stomach shaking. That's it, and Lev Segrovich, sir, you won't regret it. The profits, Lord bless us, the profits will make the old what they call Burgoys look like beggars. With our little scheme, we'll sweep in the rubles, easy as picking them off the street. A year or two, we are our own masters. A few hundred slipped where necessary, and we can fly abroad to Paris or Nice or Monte Carlo or any of the foreign places that are pleasant and artistic. Yes, said Leo wearily, abroad. Then he shook his head as if breaking off an unbearable thought and turned imperiously, throwing orders to the man who was hiring him. But that friend of yours, the communist, that's the danger point of the whole scheme. Are you sure of him? Morozov spread his fat arms wide, shaking his head gently, reproachfully, his smile as soothing as Vaseline. Lev Sergeyevich, soul of mine, you don't think I'm a helpless babe making my first steps in business, do you? I'm as sure of him as the eternal salvation of our souls. That's how sure I am. He's as smart a young man as ever you could hope to find. Quick and reasonable, and not one of those windbags that like to hear themselves talk. He's not aiming to get nothing but big words and dried herrings out of his life. No, sir. He knows when he has bread and butter in his hand and he won't let it slip through. And then again, he's the one who takes the big chance. One of us common folks. If caught, might wiggle out with 10 years in Siberia, but for one of them party men, it's the firing squad and no time to say goodbye. You don't have to worry, Leo. Antonia Pavlovna smiled. I've met the young man. We entertained him at a little tea. Champagne and caviar, to be exact. He's smart, thoroughly dependable. You can have absolute faith in Coco's business judgment. And it's not so difficult for him either. Morozov lowered his voice to a barely audible whisper. He's got one of those engineering positions with the railroad, and he's got pull in all direction like a river with tributaries. All he has to do is see that the food shipment is damaged a bit, dropped accidentally, or dampened a little or something, and see that it's pronounced worthless. That's all. The rest is simple. The shipment goes quietly to the basement of our little store. Lev Kovalensky Food Products. Nothing suspicious in that, is there? Just supplies from the store. The state cooperatives are short a load of stuff and the good citizens get nothing on their ration cards but an excuse and a promise. We wait a couple of weeks and we break up the load and ship into our own customers, private dealers all over 3 provinces, a whole net of them, reasonable and discreet. I have all the addresses and that's all. Who has to know? If anyone comes snooping around the store, well, we'll have some punk clerk there and he'll sell them half a pound of butter if they ask for it. And that's all we are doing. Oh, for all they know, retail trade, open and legal. And furthermore, Antonia Pavlovna whispered, if anything should go wrong, that young communist has. Yes, Morozov whispered and looked around furtively and paused to listen for any suspicious sound from behind the door. and reassured murmured his lips at Leo's ear. He has connections in the GPU, a powerful friend and protector. I would be scared to mention the name. Oh, we'll be safe from that quarter, said Leo said contemptuously. If we have enough money. Money? Why, Lev Sergeyevich, soul of mine? We'll have so much money you'll be rolling 10 ruble bills to make cigarettes. We split it three ways, you understand? Me, yourself, and the communist pal. We'll have to slip a little to his friend at the railroad and to the Apravdom, and we'll pay your rent here. That will go under expenses. But then you must remember that on the face of it, you are the sole owner. It's your store in your name. I have my position with the State Food Trust to think about. If I had a private store registered to my name, they would kick me out, and I have got to keep that job. You can see how useful it will be to us. He winked at Leo. Leo did not smile in answer but said, You don't have to worry. I'm not afraid. Then it's settled, huh? Why, pal, in a month from now, you won't believe you ever lived like this. You'll put some flesh on those sunken cheeks of yours and some pretty clothes on Kira Alexandrovna and a diamond bracelet or two, and then maybe a motor car. And Leo, are you insane? Kira's chair clattered against the wall and the lamp rocked and settled, shivering with a thin, glassy tinkle. She stood, the three startled faces turned to her. This isn't a joke you're playing on me, is it? Or have you lost your mind entirely? Leo leaned back slowly, looking straight at her and asked coldly, When did you assume the privilege of talking to me like that? Leo, if that's a new way of committing suicide, there are simpler ones. Really, Kira Alexandrovna, you are unnecessarily tragic about it, Antonia Pavlovna remarked coolly. Now, Kira Alexandrovna, soul of mine, Morozov said amicably. Sit down and calm yourself. Let's talk it over quietly. There's nothing to be excited about, she cried. Leo, don't you see what they are doing? You are nothing but a living screen for them. They are investing money. You are investing your life. I'm glad to find some use for it, Leo said evenly. Leo, listen. I'll be calm. Here. I'll sit down. Listen to me. You don't want to do a thing like that with your eyes closed. Look at it. Think it over. You know how hard life is these days. You don't want to make it harder, do you? You know the government we are facing, it's difficult enough to keep from under its wheels. Do you want to invite it to grind you? Don't you know that it's the firing squad for anyone caught in a crooked criminal speculation? I believe Leo has made it clear that he did not need advice, said Antonina Pavlovna, holding her cigarette poised gracefully in midair. Kira Alexandrovna, Morozov protested. Why use such strong names for a simple business proposition which is perfectly permissible and almost legal? And you keep quiet, Leo interrupted him and turned to Kira. Listen, Kira, I know that this is as rotten and crooked a deal as could be made, and I know I'm taking a chance on my life, and I still want to do it. You understand? Even if I begged you not to? Nothing you can say will change things. It's a filthy law, disgraceful business, certainly, but who forced me into it? Do you think I'll spend the rest of my life crawling, begging for a job, starving, dying slowly? I have been back 2 weeks. Have I found work? Have I found a promise of work? So they shoot food speculators. Why don't they give us a chance at something else? You don't want me to risk my life, and what is my life? I have no career, I have no future. I couldn't do what Victor Dunayev is doing if I were boiled in oil for punishment. I'm not risking much when I risk my life. Lev Sergeyevich, soul of mine, Morozov sighed with admiration. How you can talk! You two can go now, Leo ordered. I'll see you tomorrow, Morozov, and we'll look at the store. Indeed, Leo, I'm surprised. Antonina Pavlovna remarked, rising with dignity. If you let yourself be influenced and do not seem to be gracious about appreciating an opportunity when I thought you would be grateful, and who's to be grateful? He threw at her sharply, rudely. You need me and I need you. It's a business deal, that's all. Sure, that's what it is, said Morozov, and I appreciate your help, Lev Sergeyevich. It's all right, Tonia, soul of mine. You come along now and we'll settle all the details tomorrow. He spread his legs wide apart and got up with effort, for his hands leaning on his knees. His heavy stomach shivered when he moved, making his body seem uncomfortably close and apparent under the wrinkles of his suit. At the door, he turned to Leo. Well, Lex Segrovich, shall we shake on it? We can't sign a contract, of course, you understand, but we'll deepen on your words. His mouth arched contemptuously. Leo extended his hand as if the gesture were a victory over himself. Morozov shook it warmly, lengthily, and bowed low, in the old peasant manner on his way out. Antonina Pavlovna followed without looking at Kira. Leo accompanied them to the lobby. When he came back, Kira still stood as he had left her. He said before she had turned to him, Kira, we won't argue about it. There's only one thing, Leo, she whispered, and I couldn't say it in front of them. You said you had nothing left in life. I thought you had me. I haven't forgotten it, and that's one of the reasons for what I'm doing. Listen, do you think I'm going to live off you for the rest of my days? Do you think I'm going to stand by and watch you dragging excursions and swallowing soup over the Primus? That fool Antonina doesn't have to lead excursions. She wouldn't wear your kind of dresses to scrub floors in only she doesn't have to scrub floors. Well, you won't have to either. You poor little soul. You don't know what life can be. You have never seen it. But you're going to see it. And I'm going to see it before they finish me. Listen, if I knew for certain that it's the firing squad in 6 months, I would still do it. She leaned against the table because she felt faint. She whispered, Leo, if I begged you for all of my love for you, for all of yours, if I told you that I would bless every hour of every excursion, every floor I would scrub, every demonstration I would have to attend, and every club and every red flag, if only you wouldn't do this, would you still do it? He answered, yes. Citizen Karp Morozov met Citizen Pavel Syrov in a restaurant. They sat at a table in a dark corner. Citizen Morozov ordered cabbage soup. Citizen Syrov ordered tea and French pastry. Then Citizen Morozov leaned forward and whispered through the soup steam, All settled, Pavlusha. I got the man, saw him yesterday. Pavel Syrov held his cup at his lips and his pale mouth barely moved so that Morozov guessed rather than heard the question. Who? Lev Kovalensky is the name. Young, hasn't got a brass coin in the world and doesn't give a damn. Desperate, ready for anything. The white lips formed without sound. Dependable? Thoroughly. Easy to handle? Like a child. Will keep his mouth shut? Like a tomb. Morozov unloaded a heavy spoonful of cabbage into his mouth. One strand remained hanging out. He drew it in with a resounding smack. He leaned closer and breathed. Besides, he's got a social past. Father executed for counter-revolution. In case of anything, he will be the right person to blame. A treacherous aristocrat, you know. Syrov whispered. All right. His spoon cut into a chocolate eclair and a soft yellow custard spurted, spreading over his plate. He hissed through white lips, low, even sounds without expression. Now listen here. I want my share in advance, on every load. I don't want any delays. I don't want to ask twice. So help me, Pavlusha. You'll get it. You don't have to tell me you. And another thing. I want caution. Understand? Caution. From now on, you don't know me. See? If we met by chance, we are strangers. Antonina delivers the money to me in that warehouse, as agreed. Sure. I remember everything, Pavlusha. Tell that Kovalensky bum to keep away. I don't want to meet him. Sure, you don't have to. Got the store? Renting it today? Alright. Now sit still. I go first. You sit here for 20 minutes. Understand? Sure. The Lord bless us. Keep that for yourself. Good day. A secretary sat at a desk in the office of the railroad terminal. She sat behind a low wooden railing and typed, concentrating intently, drawing her upper lip in and biting her lower one. In front of the railing, there was an empty stretch of unswept floor and 2 chairs. 6 visitors waited patiently, 2 of them sitting, A door behind the secretary was marked Comrade Syrov. Comrade Syrov returned from lunch. He strode swiftly through the outer office, his tight, shiny military boots creaking. The six heads of the visitors jerked anxiously, following him with timid, pleading glances. He crossed the room as if it were empty. The secretary followed him into his inner office. A picture of Lenin hung on the wall of the inner office over a broad, new desk. It hung between diagrams showing the progress of the railroads and a sign with red letters saying, Comrades, state your business briefly. Proletarian efficiency is the discipline of peace, time, revolutionary construction. Pavel Syrov took a flat gold cigarette case from his pocket, lighted a cigarette, sat down at the desk, and looked through a stack of papers. The secretary stood waiting diffidently. Then he raised his head and asked, What's doing? There are those citizens outside, Comrade Syrov, waiting to see you. What about? Mostly jobs. Can't see anyone today. Got to hurry to the club meeting in half an hour. Have you typed my club report on railroads as the blood vessels of the proletarian state? Yes, Comrade Syrov. Here it is. Fine. No citizens out there, Comrade Syrov. They've been waiting for 3 hours. Tell them to go to hell. They can come tomorrow. If anything important comes up, call me at the Railroad Workers Union headquarters. I will be there after the club. And by the way, I'll be in late tomorrow. Yes, Comrade Syrov. Pavel Syrov walked home from the Railroad Workers Union headquarters with a party friend. Syrov was in a cheerful mood. He whistled merrily and winked at passing girls. He said, Think I'm going to throw a party tonight? Haven't had any fun for 3 weeks. Feel like dissipating? What do you say? Swell, said the friend. Just a little crowd, our own bunch, at my place? Swell. I know a fellow who can get vodka, the real stuff, and let's go to Days Gourmets and buy up everything they have in the joint. I'm with you, pal. Let's celebrate. What will we celebrate? Never mind, just celebrate. And we don't have to worry about expenses. Hell, I'm not worrying about expenses when I want a good time. That's right, comrade. Whom will we call? Let's see. Grishka and Maxim with their girls. And Lizaveta. Sure, I'll call Lizaveta. I'll call your Lizaveta and Valka Dorova. There's a girl. She'll bring half a dozen fellows along. And I guess Victor Dunai with his girl, Marisha Lavrova. Victor's a it. That's going to be a big louse someday. Have to keep on the good side of him. And say, Pal, do you think I should invite Comrade Sonia? Sure, why not? Oh hell, that cow is after me. Has been for over a year. Trying to make me, and I'll be damned if I... No appetite. But then, Pavlusha, you have got to be careful. If you hurt her feelings with Comrade Sonia's position, I know, hell. 2 profunions and 5 women's club wrapped around her little finger. Oh hell. Oh, alright, I'll call her. Pavel Syrov had pulled the curtains down over the 3 windows of his room. One of the girls had draped an orange scarf over the lamp, and it was almost dark. The guests' faces were whitish blot, strewn over the chairs, the Davenport, the floor. In the middle of the floor stood a dish with a chocolate cake from Des Gourmets. Someone had stepped on the cake. A broken bottle lay on the pillow of Syrov's bed. Victor and Marisha sat on the bed. Victor's hat lay on the floor by the Davenport. It was being used as an ashtray. A gramophone played John Gray. The record was struck, whirling, repeating persistently the same hoarse, grating notes. No one noticed it. A young man sat on the floor, leaning against a bedpost, trying to sing. He muttered a tuneless, mournful chant into his collar. Once in a while he jerked his head up and screeched a high note, so that the others shuddered, and someone flung a shoe or a pillow at him, yelling, Grishka, shut up! And then his head drooped again. A girl lay in a corner by the cuspidor, asleep, her hair glued in sticky strands to a glistening, flushed face. Pavel Syrov staged across the room, waving an empty bottle, muttering in an offended, insistent voice, A drink? Who wants a drink? Doesn't anyone want a drink? Help, Pavel, your bottle's empty, someone called from the darkness. He stopped, swaying, held the bottle up to the light, spat, and threw the bottle under the bed. So you think I haven't any more? He waved his fist menacingly at the room. Think I'm a piker, don't you? A measly piker who can't afford enough vodka? A measly piker, that's what you think, don't you? Well, I'll show you. He fumbled in a box under the table and rose, swaying, brandishing an unopened bottle over his head. He laughed. I can't afford it, can I? And reeled towards the corner from where the voice had come. He gurgled at the white spots that turned to look up at him. He swung the bottle in a huge circle and brought it down to smash it with a ringing blast against a bookcase. The girl screamed. Glass splattered in a tinkling rain. A man swore violently. My stockings, Bevel, my stockings, the girl sobbed, pulling her skirt high over drenched legs. A man's arm reached for her from the darkness. Never mind, sweetheart, take them off. Cyrov giggled triumphantly. So I can't afford it, can I? Can I? Pavel Cyrov can afford anything now. Anything on this goddamn earth. He can buy you all guts and souls. Someone had crawled under the table and was fumbling in the box, looking for more bottles. A hand knocked at the door. Come in, roared Cyrov. No one came in. The hand knocked again. What the hell? What do you want? He tottered to the door and threw it open. His next door neighbor, a fat, pallid woman, stood in the corridor, shivering in a long flannel nightgown, clutching an old shawl over her shoulders, brushing strands of grey hair out of her sleepy eyes. Citizen Cyrov, she whined with indignation. Won't you please stop that noise at such an indecent hour? You young people have no shame left these days. No fear of code, no. On your way, Grandma, on your way, Cyrov ordered. You crawl under your pillow and keep your damn mouth shut. Or would you like to take a ride to the GPU? The woman wheeled about hastily and shuffled away, making the sign of the cross. Comrade Sonia sat in a corner by the window, smoking. She wore a tailored khaki tunic with pockets on her hips and breast. It was made of expensive foreign cloth, but she kept dropping ashes on her skirt. A girl's voice pleaded in a plaintive whisper at her elbow. Say, Sonia, why did you have Dashka fired from the office? She needed the job, she did, and honest. I do not discuss business matters outside of office hours, Comrade Sonia answered coldly. Besides, my actions are always motivated by the good of the collective. Oh, sure, I don't doubt it, but listen, Sonia. Comrade Sonia noticed Pavel Cyrov swaying at the door. She rose and walked to him, cutting the girl off in the middle of a sentence. Come here, Pavel, said Comrade Sonia, her strong arm supporting him, leading him to a chair. You'd better sit down. Here, let me make you comfortable. You're a pal, Sonia, he muttered while she stuffed a pillow between his shoulder blades. You're a real pal. Now, you wouldn't holler at me if I made a little noise, would you? Of course not. You don't think that I can afford a little vodka, like some skunks here think, do you, Sonia? Of course not, Pavel. Some people don't know how to appreciate you. That's it. That's just the trouble. I'm not appreciated. I'm a great man. I'm going to be a very great man, but they don't know it. No one knows it. I'm going to be a very, very powerful man. I'm going to make the foreign capitalists look like mice. That's what. Mice. I'm going to give orders to Comrade Lenin himself. Pavel, our great chief is dead. That's right. So he is. Comrade Lenin is dead. Oh, what's the use? I have got to have a drink, Sonia. I feel very sad. Comrade Lenin is dead. That's very nice of you, Pavel. But you would better not have another drink just now. But I'm very sad, Sonia. No one appreciates me. I do, Pavel. You are a real pal. You are a real pal, Sonia. On the bed, Victor held Marisha in his arms. She giggled, counting the buttons on his tunic. She lost count after the third one and started over again. She was whispering, You're a gentleman, Victor. That's what you are. A gentleman. That's why I love you, because you are a gentleman and I'm only a gutter brat. My mother, she was a cook before, I remember many years ago, she used to work in a big house. They had horses and carriages and a bathroom, and I used to peel vegetables for her in their kitchen. And there was an elegant young man, their son. Oh, he had such pretty uniform and he spoke all sorts of foreign languages. He looked just like you, and I didn't even dare to look at him, and now I have a gentleman of my own. She giggled happily. Isn't it funny? I am Marishka the vegetable peeler. Victor said, oh, shut up, and kissed her, his head drooping sleepily. A girl giggled, standing over there in the darkness. When are you two going to get registered at the marriage office? Go away. Marisha waved at her. We'll be registered. We are engaged. Comrade Sonia had pulled a chair close to Syrov's and he sprawled his head on her lap while she stroked his hair. Close to Syrov, he was muttering, you're a rare woman, Sonia. You're a wonderful woman. You understand me. I do, Pavel. I have always said that you were the most talented, the most brilliant young man in our collective. You're a wonderful woman, Sonia. He was kissing her, moaning. No one appreciates me. He had pulled her down to the floor, leaning over her soft, heavy body, whispering, a fellow needs a woman, a smart, understanding, strong, and hefty woman. Who care for those skinny scarecrows? I like a woman like you, Sonia. He did not know how he found himself suddenly in the little storage closet between his room and that of his neighbors. A cobwebbed window high under the ceiling threw a dusty ray of moonlight on a towering pile of boxes and baskets. He was leaning against Comrade Sonia's shoulder, stammering, they think Pavel Syrov's gonna be another stray mongrel eating out of slop pails all his life. Well, I'll show them. Pavel Syrov will show them who's got the whip. I've got a secret, a great secret, Sonia. But I can't tell you. But I've always liked you, Sonia. I've always needed a woman like you, Sonia. Soft and comfortable. When he tried to stretch himself on the flat top of a large wicker basket, the piled tower shuddered, swayed, and came down with a thundering crash. The neighbors knocked furiously, protesting against the wall. Comrades Sonia and Pavel Syrov on the floor paid no attention. That brings us to the end of our chapter 4 of part 2. We'll be continuing with chapter 5 later in the next reading. If you liked, like, share, and subscribe. Do not forget to subscribe. If there are any comments, negative, positive, any kind of suggestions, recommendations, anything at all, you can reach out to me in the comment section of the video you're viewing or in the community section. Bye bye for now. Keep reading. Take care. Bye.